Lakeland PBS presents Common Ground, brought to you by the Minnesota Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund and the citizens of Minnesota. Production funding of Common Ground is made possible in part by First National Bank Bemidji, continuing their second century of service to the community. Member FDIC. Welcome to Common Ground. I'm producer-director Scott Knudsen. In this episode, 101-year-old Thomas Dziengel, who is producer Andrew Dziengel's grandfather, tells us of how he's witnessed technology change over his lifetime.
In 1918, I was born in Primrose, Nebraska, and I don't know, I was probably 2, 3 years old. So we moved to St. Paul, Nebraska, on the north side of town. Dad was Peter Paul Dziengel. Grandma was Josephine. It was lovely, everything. My dad's side of the family, Dad was born in Poland. That's when they come across. And he had an older brother and sister. Great-grandpa brought him to Nebraska. That's why I suppose some of the other ones, relatives, they moved down there, so when they come over from overseas. Ed and Adolph, they were my half-brothers, because their mother died in the flu epidemic. They had that in Nebraska yet. That was before, when they come from old country. Dad, he hired great-grandma to take care of the kids, baby. Of course, said he would be married to her afterwards. So the rest of us are full brothers and sisters. Ed was the oldest, and Adolph, and was Tekla, and then there was Clem, Louie, Chester, Irene, and me. Then was Dorothy and Dolores, the twins. And then there was Josephine and Peter. Peter was a baby. 2 of us, that's all that's left. There's just Irene and I. I was only 4 or 5 years old, I think. That's when we lost the farm. We were off of the farm then. Everybody lost their land, their depression started to hit then. Nobody could pay for nothing. So we had an auction sale, what was sold. I was at 4 different families up till July. Us kids were all farmed out to different relatives down there too. Because we didn't have no house. In 1925, that's when we went for North Dakota. They shipped Ed, Brother Ed, to New Rockford. They had a Model T car. They ended up in Cando, North Dakota, because that's the first time they found some crop. They never had no crop in Nebraska after that for 9 years either. It was so dry. So when they come back, they told Dad they were crashing 9 bushels to the acre wheat. So that was a big crop. It's a lot better than nothing. So Dad said, we got to be something better than this. That's when we just took off. And when we got to New Rockford, North Dakota, that's where we camped out. And it was getting close to harvest time, and my dad, he knew how to run a steam engine and how to fix one. So he got a job for a big farmer out of town there to get the steamer ready, his steamer for harvest, for trashing. So he got early work. Of course, then Ed and Clem, they got jobs cutting grain with horses. Of course, then when harvest time come, why Ed, he got a job hauling water for the steamer. And Clem, he got to be, he was old enough to pitch bundles. He actually wasn't, but he did it. Brother Pete was born 4th of July. He was born at home. Then 3rd or 4th day, Ma got scarlet fever. Afterwards, we found out that the people had scarlet fever, but the house was never fumigated or nothing. So that's how come we caught it afterwards. So the whole family of us got it. My mom just about died. A doctor from New Rockford, he delivered him at home there. When he found out scarlet fever, then they got Brother Pete out as a baby. They took him out to a foster home. Otherwise, he would have died if he'd got it. But all of us younger ones, we all got it. But I never got it that bad that no toilets in the house. It was all pots. And that was my daily chore, to empty the pots out and wash them out every day. Because I was healthy enough that I could do that. And the older ones, they were all sicker than me. So maybe I was 10 years old at the most. And of course, we got it in July, so the harvest was starting already. And the doctor for Dad and Clem and Louie, he brought them out 100 proof alcohol. They were supposed to have a drink every day on it. So they never got the scarlet fever. That pure alcohol. I had a little Bronco, the scrap of the horses, a Bronco and one that wouldn't pull a load. So I had to go to town every day and get a ton of coal for the seamen. And it was a lump coal, that's what we burned. So then first time I went to town, they had coal sheds by every elevator them days. So I got into the bend where the lump coal was, and I picked up the shovel. I was going to put it in a wagon with the shovel, yeah. I never even got the first scoop in because I was too small. Every time I lifted it up, I'd lose balance of the lump of coal that I had there. Would roll over onto the side, and I'd lose it on the floor. So after that, I just threw the shovel away, and one piece at a time I loaded it. The steamer had 2 coal boxes on it. So when Clem would unload it in the coal box, so when my wagon got empty, but he had two coal boxes full until I come back. So he never run out of coal. At that time, I think we were trash for 3 neighbors. Of course, Dad was working on the farm, and Ed and Clem, they were working there. They made a little money. It wasn't much, but there was food up for the table. So then in the fall of the year, then we finally rented a farm out of town. And then we farmed 1 year by New Rockford. But of course, for Dad, that wasn't big enough. So he finally rented a farm to 2 guys from Iowa by Brantford. They each bought a section of land up there, and they had 1 set of buildings on it. So that's where we started farming over there with horses. We never had no tractor. It was all horses. And well, how we got to own that many horses all of a sudden. Of course, you could buy a horse for $15. 1928, we had a real good crop. It's the only crop we had in up to the 1932. We never had a crop. We always dried out. 1930, the dust storms were so bad that You couldn't see nothing. We never seen sunshine for 30 days. So much dust in the air. It blew the dirt out 6 inches deep off of the field. It was all up in the air. 32, and that was all Russian thistles. And when they got there was nothing. The wheat never even came up. So Dad and Clem, they took off with the car, and they ended up in Grand Forks, looking for a different place. There they found out Metropolitan Life Insurance Company foreclosed on different farms. They owned 400 farms from Fargo to the Canadian border that they took back up from other people. That farm was the biggest farm there was around Argyle, 2 sections of land. And then when they come back home, we had auction sales of what we didn't need. We didn't need no many cows. Ma's 2 cows come along with us. After the auction sale, then me and Brother Chester and Clem and Louie, we hooked up the horses, but we had 6 teams of horses left yet. And so we drove 150 miles with horses to Argyle. And it took us 6 days. The last day we stayed by Oslo. That's the last night we were out on the road. And starting to drizzle in the evening. Of course, we drove into a farmyard. There was nothing in the barn, so we put our horses in the barn, and then we slept in the house with the other people on some straw on the floor upstairs, because they didn't have nothing either. So we got up in the morning, we fed the horses, and it was colder than hell. and so it started drizzling, and we got up and hit the road. By the time we were getting to Argyle, it was so cold, it was freezing lumps on a dirt road. So freezing lumps of dirt onto the wagon wheels. And by the time it was 4 o'clock when we got to Argyle. And by the time we made the last half a mile, then the snow started falling. And the next morning we got up, boy, there was such a damn blizzard you couldn't see nothing. So we lucked out, us boys, but the good Lord was looking out for us that we made it. We didn't get caught on the road with that mess. And we got to Argyle. Day Roosevelt got president elected in 1932. I was 12 years old. They drove them horses. In Argyle, there used to be a big hospital or something. It was nice, and the nuns took over next to the French church. We had 8 grades. The sisters were teaching. And at that time, there was 16 or 17 nuns in there. They had 2 cows that they had for own milk. They had a little barn behind it. Like at that time, almost everybody in Argyle, they had a cow for their own milk. My ma, she walked over to the nuns and she made a deal with them to furnish milk for them for our tuition. So I went to the Catholic school. I never started until the ground froze up. I had to stay home and work. When I started school, I got my part for my Christmas program. That's when I started school. But I got to finish in the spring. I was scared I would never finish it. I'd have to stay home and work.
What was your favorite subject?
I don't know. I took them all, and that was it. I passed them all, and I never, no problem. Never took homework home, and I graduated. I even got a diploma out of there. And we lived in Argyle. There was still 10 of us at home with Ma and Pa. So we bought flour by the 100-pound bag, bought it through the elevator, and we bought a ton of flour a year. So when we wanted one, we just went uptown to the elevator and got a sack. And Ma baked all the bread for all them people. She had to bake bread twice a week because we ate a lot of bread because it was the cheapest to eat. We didn't have much when we first moved to Argyle. 1938, we bought ourselves a tractor. Oh, it really changed a lot because then afterwards, the way they run the tractor 24 hours a day. It had lights on it, and then afterwards we traded that one off and bought a Caterpillar. And then Louis cultivated all night with cultivators, and they had a fuel tank out in the field on a wagon. So they just fuel up the tractor again, and then when Chet would come out, and Chet would seed all day. We had 2 drills behind the Caterpillar. That made it a lot easier. Otherwise, we seeded with horses. Well, we worked all the time. And Saturday night, went to town. Sometimes I went to the show. If you had put 25 cents, you could go to the show. 1942, I left. Dad took a guy from Argyle down to Osakis. Of course, that was right down his alley because he liked to hunt and fish. he didn't care. After he got down there, he didn't know how he done a little bit of work, helped me put a crop in over there. And then he rented a 440-acre farm for $2 an acre cash rent. I had to go with Mom and Dad to farm that land over there. And then I moved to Osakis, and Chet, and Louis, they were supposed to take over that big farm. And of course, then Louis got drafted to the Army. Chet couldn't handle that himself. So Dad got him set up down there at Sauk Center. That was the next town from Osakis. I was south of Osakis, but I mean, Homeman Herberger had the first store was in Osakis, but he went into real estate. So he was buying farms and renting them out. People that lost their farms before, they didn't catch up yet, so he'd get in there and buy them up. And they had a carpenter crew in the summertime. They were always painting and putting the boards on. And the buildings looked real nice, and he put them up for sale. And he go buy another one. He had a little office in the back of that, his first store. That was his office. He was a heck of a nice guy. Well, I met Rada Satinsky. I met her because my older brother, he was going with her sister. And they were going to a dance in Strandquist. So I wanted to go to a dance. I didn't have nobody. And she wanted to go dancing. So that's where we met. Before I moved to Sauk Center, then I bought her engagement ring. Because he graduated from high school that spring. I think I made a couple of trips before we got married up here. Oh yes, we wrote letters. That's a must. Yeah, at least once a week, sometimes twice. We got married in June in '43. We had 7 kids. Jim was the first one. Patty was born the fall that we bought the farm. And then it was Charlotte, and then was Angela, and then it was Larry, then it was Lake, and then Michelle. Well, we couldn't buy a farm. We didn't have no money. We didn't have nothing to make a down payment on nothing. And only way you had to buy a farm if you wanted a farm. So Grandma says she wanted to move back here anyway. Well, Jimmy was born then. He was 2 years old. I took him with me on the train. I come down here. That's when I bought this farm here. I tried to rent one, but then Adam and his brother John had this farm, and Adam had the other one over there. So he was going to quit anyway because he bought this here. That was all woods. And the next quarter, and then the only open land was 40 acres right here where the buildings are. So Uncle John here, he was figuring on selling. So we come over and talked to him, and well, Grandpa, they were brothers, so he finally offered it to me for $9,000 for the farm. I didn't have that money either to make the down payment, so I borrowed from my father-in-law $1,000 and $1,000 from Clem to make the down payment because he wanted $2,000 down. And then he asked me how much I could pay for the rest of it. I had $7,000 left to pay. And I said, oh, I could give you $1,000 a year for payment. Oh, well, he figured out, boy, yeah, I'll sell it to him. And he was determined that I would never be able to pay for it, that he would get it back, see. And I started working for Clarence Carlson, working with potatoes when the last payment was due. I had the cattle, but I didn't have time to haul them to Fargo to sell. So I got a registered letter in the mail that if I don't pay it, then he'll take the farm over. That was his plan in the first place, that I would never be able to pay for it. But the next day, I put the cattle rack on a truck and got the cattle down there and brought, I had $1,300 I got for the cattle. So I had $1,000 to pay him. So that's the way it went. And then after that, then I paid Grandpa off his $1,000, and I paid Clem off his $1,000 besides in a couple more years. So the farm was clear. By the way, that was cheap, $9,000 for 370 acres. So I bought the farm, and I come back there and told her, well, we're moving. But when I moved, well, then Grandpa and Chet, they come down with trucks. I had all the machinery parts down there, so I could load it all in pieces. and they made one trip with the two farm trucks, and then Chet come down with the one with the cattle rack on it, and he brought the livestock. And when I got here, then I had to put everything back together again. In 1948 was the first crop I put in. I'm still living. I ain't going no place yet. Until you guys haul me away. We had a crop of grain, and it was so wet we couldn't trash it off. We were getting stuck with the combines all the time. So then I went to work at Arctic, just so I could buy groceries. But then I finally, after the ground froze, then I got the crop off. So then I worked till spring, and then I was seeding in the spring, and I had 30 acres left to seed. When they called me, Tom, you want to come back to work? Anyway, I went back to work part-time, and I stayed there for 13 years and farmed besides. People complaining that pull heads off and they're sitting in a tractor with a cab on. And I never had a cab on my tractor. I never will. But I stayed out there in the dust. Didn't bother me. It had to be done. I couldn't afford to change it. It was a busy time, but it worked out. It was hard, but then Arctic went under when I got laid off. By the time I got through there, I didn't owe a dime. I had all my bills paid, farmers paid off, everything. I didn't owe a dime to anybody. So that worked out pretty good. Well, I never got into trouble with nobody. I never got in no fights, no bad arguments. No misunderstandings, and kind of keep your mouth shut and go with the flow. That's the best way. And probably learn something from somebody else. But it's getting to the point where it's kind of getting to me, you know, because I don't know, not to get too interested in anything special. Getting a little bit tougher to get around. But you give me a polka music, I think I could go on and dance. The feet start tapping right away.
Thank you so much for watching. Join us again next week on Common Ground. If you have an idea for Common Ground in north central Minnesota, email us at legacy@lptv.org or call 218-333-3014. To watch Common Ground online, visit lptv.org and click local shows. Episodes or segments of Common Ground, call 218-333-3020. Production funding of Common Ground was made possible in part by First National Bank Bemidji, continuing their second century of service to the community. Member FDIC. Common Ground is brought to you by the Minnesota Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund, with money by the vote of the people November 4th, 2008. If you watch Common Ground online, consider becoming a member or making a donation at lptv.org.